Hello, whiskey lovers, and welcome to another episode of In Good Spirits. I'm your host, Tom Ballantyne, and today we've got a fascinating journey through the world of whiskey distilleries. In this episode, I'll be highlighting a few whiskey distilleries that, in my opinion, and I preface that, in my opinion, have the strongest brands and are certainly the most popular or more popular whiskies to invest but also drink. They're very interchangeable for those ones. So, whether you're interested in collecting, drinking, or investing in whiskey, hopefully you'll find something interesting that piques your interest, and let's dive in. Firstly, why these distilleries I've chosen. Combination of market demand, heritage and brand strength, special editions and collectability, and global trends. So, it's not a spreadsheet I've necessarily put together and a perfect science. It's a bit more of an art and a bit more of my own personal view on it as well. But it is something that, having worked in the industry and then having bought quite a few casks of whiskey and bottles of whiskey and been doing this over the last kind of decade, something that I'm quite familiar with now and something that I think I have a good judgment on and a good sense of. So specifically, I'm going to look through the lens of Scottish investment in whiskey. I won't necessarily touch on international ones. I'll touch on that in a later section. But let's start with the classic ones with Scotland. So Scotland is widely regarded as the birthplace of whiskey, and don't tell the Irish that. There's always a little bit of back and forth as who was the first distillery, who was the first to make the whiskey, who had the first founding of distillery. I think it's all depends how you phrase the question, who founded the distillery, who made it first, and who has the longest serving one and making it, all depends on how you phrase the question. But Scotland is the genesis of it, and that's just where we'll start. So if you're looking to build your collection of whiskey or just want to know some of the best whiskey brands, these are the top few distilleries that I think are out there. So number one, Macallan. You've probably heard me mention them many times in the first few episodes. That's not just by coincidence, but Macallan is one of the kind of showpiece whiskies, and if I want to equate them to other areas of the world, they are the Rolex of whiskies, they are the Ferrari of whiskies. They have the brand recognition. If I invite anybody to watch a James Bond film, his favourite drink is a Macallan 40, I believe. And if you notice in any of the films, normally he has a Macallan subtly placed in the film somewhere, on the table or. The most obvious one that comes to mind is Skyfall, where he has to try and shoot a glass of Macallan off a lady's head. But it's not only because of James Bond that the whiskey distillery is successful. It's been going for over 200 years, like many of the original distilleries, shall we say, and it's always known for producing high quality single malts. So even their 12-year-old from a starting point is a lot more expensive. So if you compare their 12-year-old double cask to a Glenfiddich you can probably pick up for 25, but the 12-year-old Macallan you're probably looking at minimum 50 or 45. So immediately already has that brand recognition for it. And my personal opinion, a lot of that is marketing, but that's a story for another day, I believe. And I have a lot of trepidations when people always say that Macallan is the best whiskey, because it's kind of like saying Ferrari's the best car. It might be a very well made car, and it might be very beautiful to look at, but it might not be the best car for you, or what is the best car. It's also subjective at that point. Number two is Ardbeg. So Ardbeg is a distillery located on the island of Islay. So if anybody who doesn't know where that is, if you go look at a UK map, go to Glasgow and basically just head west until you get to the sea, and then just look a little bit more west, and then you've got loads of small islands that have lots of distilleries on them. Always a good fun to go and visit, particularly in the summertime. Definitely recommend anybody in July and August to get up to that part of the world. A, it's beautiful, and B, it's just a really fun place to be. You can really disconnect from the world. I've been up there quite a few times. When I used to live in Glasgow, I used to go to the island of Jura and the island of Arran quite frequently, just as a really kind of cool place to kind of hang out, get away, switch off, disconnect from the world, and just enjoy your just kind of beautiful surroundings. And there's also, in the summer, it's a lot nicer. As soon as you get past September, October, it becomes out of season, and a lot of the kind of tourist support that naturally comes along with it tends to stop. So, do go visit the island. But as a massive segue, I just went on. Ardbeg is from that beautiful island just outside there, or on the island, shall I say, on the coast. Big white walls that say Ardbeg on the side of it. Very, very famous for it. They're a lot famous for their peated whiskey. So for those of you that don't know, peated whiskey is an organic material found in kind of boggy waterlands and is composed of decaying plant matter. And what they do that is they use it for fuel source, but also they use that to kind of dry the malt and barley in the whiskey process. So basically they burn this as fuel. The whiskey, or the barley, shall I say, absorbs all that smoke from the peat into the barley itself. So then when they come to actually distill it, all of those smoky characters that the grain has picked up while drying is infused with the whiskey, infused with the spirit straight away, and gives you that kind of smoky flavour. People do kind of think it's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it in that regard. And for those who haven't tried it, it's like leather for someone who doesn't enjoy it like myself. I'm much more of a softer, sweeter, Speyside kind of person. But these Islay ones tend to be big, bold, full-bodied, smoky, leathery, lots of tannings nature to them. So people do really love them because they're very, very distinctive. But I find them a bit overpowering. But that's just my own personal opinion. But Ardbeg itself, you'll find very, very few barrels to buy, but you'll also find that they're a very fun distillery. If you do like them, they try lots of different variations. They've got loads of different names like Ugadal, Corriagreckin, and everything you can heard of. It's got some random names to it, and they love trying out different ways to do their whiskey, to age their whiskey. So I think they aged one in space. They've aged ones using ex-fish barrels. Really, really fun distillery and interesting stuff that they do. But also very, very well recognised around the world because it's such an iconic flavour and it's such a distillery that tends to have the most peated whiskey. So, i.e., it has the most strength of peated whiskey, I should say. One that certainly you should look out for. A, for investing, but B, if you want a big, strong, punchy whiskey, certainly to go for. Number 3, Glenfiddich. Most people have probably heard of this one. One of the oldest distilleries, if not the oldest distillery in the world. They produce the most whiskey in the world, or at least in Scotland. I should preface that, probably not the world. And just a very reputable name around the world. Everybody's heard of it. You can find it in every supermarket. You can find it in every travel duty place around the world, and certainly one that has a very strong following and a very strong global presence around the world. Number 4 I've got is Dalmore. So Dalmore is a distillery found in the Highlands of Scotland. It's one of the most prestigious and renowned distilleries, known for its kind of heavy sherry influence. So they tend to be quite dark and full-bodied and Christmas cakey and rich. And one that has the very famous stag head on it. So if you ever go to a whiskey distillery and you see a big silver stag on the bottle, it's no doubt Dalmore. Very distinctive brand, very recognisable packaging, and a very fun master blender, Richard Patterson. Richard Patterson is very famous for his whiskey distilleries from Dalmore and all the different releases that they do, such as Constellation, but also just the way he is an ambassador for the whiskey world. He always gets brought on the talk show hosts. I recommend anybody looking up on YouTube any of his interviews. He is really, really fun. He really is passionate about his whiskey, and he's just a really, really fun person. Finally, number 5, I've got Highland Park. Highland Park is based on Orkney, the Orkney Island. So if I do the same thing like I did with Islay, if you go from Edinburgh this time, but just basically go north all the way till you get to the coast, and then first island you get off the coast of Scotland, heading north again, you get to Orkney. There's 2 distilleries on that island. One's Scapa, one's Highland Park. Highland Park is a lot more famous. Its brand is a lot stronger. One that many people want to invest in, love the whiskey. These tend to be a little bit peaty and then a lot of sweetness. So they're not too heavy on the peat like Ardbeg, but they too tend to have a little bit of peated whiskey to give it a little bit more of an impact when you try it, but not without the kind of smoky dominance that Ardbeg has. Very, very drinkable whiskey. Very, very good. The 18-year-old in particular is a fantastic whiskey. One that I'll recommend anybody trying. But certainly those guys are very, very reputable, very, very difficult to get a hold of in terms of casks. And I encourage anybody to look at their range as well. Very, very strong. And you can see just from their pricing how much people are loving those whiskies. So to round out the top 5, that was Macallan, Ardbeg, Glenfiddich, Dalmore and Highland Park. Those are the guys I would certainly look out for. Whether you're buying a bottle or whether you're buying a cask, I would always look out for those 5. Those guys, their brand, their recognition, their kind of overall play in the whiskey world are the guys to look out for. They always have a presence in the whiskey world. They always dominate the kind of big sales and always dominate the kind of headlines when there's kind of some fun change going on in the whiskey world. So always look out for those guys. Now, if I was going to add in one extra thing, and this is a star note, it would be not only Ardbeg, but number 6, I would put all other Islay whiskies. So on the island of Islay, there are 9 distilleries in total. That's Ardbeg, Ardnahoe, Bowmore, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain, Coal Isla, Kilcoman, Lagavulin and Laphroaig. So any of those that you could get from the island of Islay, I would certainly look out to buy. They are few and far between, and they tend to be a little bit more expensive when you want to buy them. Looking at this from a particular cask point of view, from a bottling point of view, you should probably look out for special editions and special releases from them. Those ones will always seem to command the high prices and always have a loyal fan base, ones who are always willing to buy their stuff. Lagavulin in particular always seem to have some sort of special release coming out and one that people will always want to buy. So as a safer investment, those guys are certainly ones I would look out for. So as a star for Islay whiskey, number 6, always look out for those to buy. But remember, like I spoke about a couple episodes ago about first fill sherry hogshead, reminder that each one of those components factors into this as a pricing standpoint. So don't go for a first fill sherry barrel and expect to pay £20,000. Go for a first fill sherry butt and you could be paying £20,000. So just make sure that you listen to that previous episode to equip yourselves with all the different knowledge about that sentence, because it will help you give an idea as to how much you should be buying that whiskey and what that value of that whiskey really should be. And brokers will certainly give you a good indication of it, but it's also good arming yourself with all that knowledge that you know about the different levels, different prices and the reputation and everything like that. So hopefully through listening to this show, you guys are getting more and more equipped with that knowledge and can start investing or feel safer investing into this weird and wonderful world. Now, I'm going to add an extra side note. This is not a particular distillery, but I would call this a subsection of distilleries. And this is mainly for anybody who wants to buy bottles of whiskey rather than buying casks of whiskey. And this is demolished distilleries. So what is a demolished distillery? Well, it's just a distillery that doesn't exist anymore. Simple as that. There are many subcategories to that. For example, mothballed, dismantled, demolished are all the classic names. To give you a quick rundown of what they all mean, mothballed is a distillery that's been temporarily closed but preserved for potential future reopening. This is not, new to the whiskey industry. It has its peaks and it has its downs, and when it goes through its down period, a lot of distilleries just close and cease production, but they don't actually destroy the facility itself. Dismantled is where most of the distillery, if not all the equipment, has been removed and sold off, but the building itself will exist. So it's not been mothballed because you can't just produce again, but it's not been demolished. And then demolished, as the name suggests, it's been completely destroyed and demolished. But to go about this subsection of demolished distilleries, one that, as the name I've already mentioned, means that there's no more being produced, their prices of bottles are certainly going to go up more and more. And the classic one of this is Port Ellen. So if I was going to give you my kind of top 5 for investing in demolished distilleries, you're looking at Port Ellen, Brora, St Magdalene, Rosebank and Pittivac. So those ones I would certainly look out for. But there's, tens and 20s of these distilleries that have been closed down that you can look into and look to buy. Because literally, as the name suggests, the distilleries are gone. No more of that is being produced. That normally means there's no more barrels left to bottle, and the bottles are becoming ever rarer. Or, like in some cases, they do have some of these barrels lying around, particularly if you're Diageo, and they do special releases each year. So Port Ellen had a series going for a while where they're releasing many casks each year to sell to the public. I think it was just, a few thousand bottles that turned out to. And because it was closed since 1983, you're looking at 30, 35, 40-year-old whiskies. So certainly one to look out for. One that we spoke about in the 101 is always the supply and demand element and how supply is fixed each time. If the distillery is literally closed, then there's no more being produced. And another one that I would look out for, actually, is if you hear of a distillery closing within a certain time period. A good example of this is COVID. So we had quite a few distilleries that didn't close but dropped their production by about half during this kind of 3-year period. So there is going to be a small kind of resource or supply gap at some point in 10 years' time where there's just not going to be as much liquid just for a year or two. Now, whether this gets just smoothed out because it's not a significant enough period for it to really affect the market, or whether there might just be a sudden kind of price boom or a certain amount of releases just don't get released that year, so there's just no special editions done, or there's just other ways that the market might move. Time will tell. But just looking out for distilleries that haven't produced throughout a certain time period is also a good way of kind of buying the bottles now and knowing that their price is always going to increase, since you literally have one that's not going to produce anymore. So, that's all the Scottish ones that I want everybody to look out for. Those are my top 5 distilleries, 6 if you want to include Islay as a wider package. And I spoke about the demolished distilleries there. If I quickly want to give you just an overview of the international market, Yamazaki from Japan is certainly the biggest brand out there. Redbreast from Ireland, number 2. Hibiki/Suntory, number 3 out there. Certainly look at those guys. If you want a bit more of a history of Japan, listen to my 101, my first episode. I kind of break down why Japanese whiskey is so sought after these days. And then you've got a couple others out there like Kavalan in Taiwan. They've won quite a few awards recently, so one to keep an eye on. They're relatively new distillery, I think 10-15 years old, and Crown Royal in Canada as well. They're someone to look out for as well. The other guys, if you're going to look at bourbon in America, so I've called these out specifically, then you've got Pappy Van Winkle. Pappy Van Winkle by far is the most popular whiskey distillery in the United States, classically having 10, 12, 15-year-old bourbons. I think they go all the way up to 23 in their core range and only produced a set limit per year, and are always kind of quite a few $100s to even buy, which is quite expensive for a bourbon. They go all the way up to thousands of dollars for their kind of aged stuff. Buffalo Trace, another classic one. Whistle Pig, Maker's Mark would be the other guys to look out for in the US. I would do a lot more research. They're not as investable, I would say, overall, compared to the history and the depth of the Scottish market. But ones that you can certainly look to invest in. There's lots of fun distilleries out there, and there's lots of packages with brokers out there that are now doing guaranteed buybacks after 4 years. So you buy basically 6 casks off them, hold it for 4 years, and then get something like 25% return on it. So, an interesting market, but ones that don't have the same brand recognition, just because I think a lot of the kind of history and the genesis of whiskey comes from Scotland, and the brands there are a lot more powerful and a lot more impactful around the world. So that's it for today's show. Thank you very much for listening. That was my top 5 whiskey distilleries to invest in Scotland, and a couple more globally around the world. This is just my own personal list. I'm sure once you start investing yourself, you might come up with your own list. Again, as always, thank you very much for your support and listening to the show. Please like, share, subscribe on all platforms. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Next show, we'll be talking about the data of whiskey and some actual real world examples as to investing and what the returns are. So I'll walk you through some of the investments that I've made and then some of the sales that I've made on my whiskey casks, but also what brokers are now offering for those casks that I've got, to kind of give you those real world data insights, and that it's not just all pie in the sky thinking and nice to haves. So thank you for listening and good night.